Fun Animal Park! Yes, it's that time again for another edition of Wait, that game exists? I enjoy reviewing games that most people have never heard of or will ever play. But you never know who might want a review of a game to find out if it's good or not, so I try to include all types of titles to review. The Wii had a glut of third-party games for it, so I couldn't throw a rock without finding some obscure game to review. Not so much for the Wii U. Other than shovelware, the Wii U didn't get a lot of third-party support. Now that the Switch is successful, we're seeing more and more third-party developers making games for it. Now this is a minigame collection. I would say the difficulty level is aimed at younger children, so I will give certain breaks to the gameplay, like the fact it's so simplistic you could be half asleep and still get a good score. There isn't any real challenge to be found here, and the game doesn't pretend to give you one. You can play with up to one other player. It's incredibly limiting to have a minigame collection that doesn't support at least 4 players. Honestly, I don't see why they didn't add support for 4 players. Add 2 more characters to the game, and have 4 screens. None of the games would really be affected too much, in my opinion. The whole game is narrated by a lion and a bunny. They are the characters that you're representing in the game. If you're playing as 2 players, the first player is the lion and the other is the bunny. You have no choice. There is a surprising amount of voice acting between the 2 characters. They will jabber on if you're just sitting around, not playing the game. And it mostly consists of the bunny beating to the lion.
The only trouble you ever have is figuring out when your next nap will be.
That's right. I do like my siestas.
Well, sleep is good for children. So carefree and full of joy you are. Telltale signs of one with too much time on their hands.
Those first 2 sound like compliments. Keep them coming.
The games consist of you playing with animals or using them as tools in your game, like throwing a ring around a giraffe or photographing a lizard's tongue, or chucking a penguin down a lane to get closest to the edge without falling off. It's just curling if you used animals instead of rocks. The controls are not good. At no time did I think I had any real control of what was going on when it came to the motion controls. It wasn't unplayable, but there is no sense of nuance if you're playing with the motion controls. If they had you just pressing a button to do the action, it worked just fine. If you had to use the motion controls, good luck on anything you had to do. It didn't help that, for example, in the disc throwing game, you couldn't see where you were aiming, so throwing it was just an exercise in guessing. The level of realism in the animal's movements was laughable at best. The pig in this race will move in quick motions in ways that will break every law of movement out there. And it was also really hard to control because just like the other games, the motion controls are terrible in this, and you would often overcorrect a turn because you would move from lane to lane and you never really knew how much of a tilt you had to do to get into another lane. There are 3 modes to play. A tour mode, which has you playing a certain number of games for random director's medals, and at the end whoever has the most medals wins. A one-shot mode, which has you playing one game to see who wins. Both of these modes were 2 players only. There is no CPU to play with you on this. Once again, a really strange thing not to have in your game. It's really limiting if you just don't have anyone to play with at the time. Then there's solo mode, which has you playing all the games you can play with 1 player. It's not all the games, and if you want to play them all, you're going to need to find another person to play with you. Or you can just hold both Joy-Cons and compete against yourself. And since no one in this household will go near this title, that's exactly what I had to do. In the tour mode, the 2 hosts will jabber on and say the same things every time. Luckily, you can fast forward through this, but it acts like a VCR fast forward button, where it's like, why bother having this fast forward button? It seems like an extra step that isn't even needed when skip is an option in most games. And one other little weird thing, doesn't it look like this penguin's going upwards instead of downwards? It's a weird graphical thing that I think that they kind of screwed up on. Or maybe this penguin's magical and can slide uphills instead of down. Fun Animal Park is not a great game. Graphically, it's very simplistic. The motion controls were not good, but it's very easy for kids to understand. There are 30 games in here to play, but most of them were just repetitive or just boring. I would just skip this one. There are just so many other good Switch games to play if you're looking for a title for younger kids. Go Vacation is a great example. Easy for younger kids to play, and an open world for them to explore. As for this game, there just isn't anything here that I think is worth your time, so I would just skip it.